Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome to Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I'm your host of this podcast, Doc Frank, and my conversation today is with Andy Knight from Derby in the United Kingdom. Andy is Managing Director of a company called Signet, which is one of the primary providers of signaling training in the UK. Andy also has been the president of the IRSE, the Institution of Railway Signal Engineers, for the past year, from April 2022 to April this year. And unsurprisingly, those are the two main topics that we talk about. So we talk about Andy's presidency of the IRSE and the challenges related to that. We also talk about signaling training and about ways to attract people to the railway industry. I hope you find it interesting. Please enjoy listening.
Hi, it's Doc Frank here. Real quick, I want to let you know about one of the best CBTC trainings in the world, if not the very best, but you always need to be careful with superlatives. It's the CBTC Kickstarter online course. It consists of 30 video lessons. That's the 3 with the 0. In total, over 11 hours of training content, talking about everything from the basics of CBTC, current standards, the benefits of CBTC, the key functionality of it, the supply industry, application tips and tricks, lessons learned, do's and don'ts, case studies, arguably the most comprehensive training that you can find anywhere on the topic of CBTC. There are a few additional things that make learning easier for you that you may not find on any other online courses. One of them being an immersion plan that helps guiding you through the training course and progress it in a finite period of time instead of just having it sit there for months and months on end. There is access to an online study group where you can connect with other students who are doing that training course at the time and form learning groups. There will be live coaching calls once every 2 weeks. And after the training, you will not be on your own. There is an alumni community that allows you to ask questions about the course content on an ongoing basis. So it's basically education for life. You can inform yourself about this training course and register to it on my training portal, which is docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I look forward to seeing you at that training. And until then, please enjoy my upcoming episode of this podcast.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And other than that, I think we can just start. I will probably start asking you a bit about your career, how you got to where you were now. And then we probably go next into the RSE thing, basically saying your last year was a bit out of the ordinary because of that RSE presidency. And then if we have some time left, we do anything between 30 and 60 minutes, depending on how we go. Then we may go a little bit more into this signaling training things, maybe developing resources in the industry, your views on that, something around that area, and that should make for an interesting conversation.
Yep.
All right, then we're starting. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Very grateful for the invite and really lucky that we're both in the same country at the same time.
Yes, you are actually in Perth right now as we speak, but we're still not in the same room because my technical setup is basically just made for having remote conversations, which is the case most of the time with most of my guests because they are in different cities, interstate, or in different countries even. And you are normally from the UK as well, so it's just a coincidence that you happen to be in the same city as I am right now. And maybe you can start off giving us a bit of a background of your career and also linking what made you to come to Perth, because you're obviously here for a reason, not just enjoying the beautiful weather.
Yes, exactly. Well, I at present I'm the Managing Director of Signet Solutions, but it takes you quite a while to get to there. So I come from a fairly traditional background. I left school and went on to what was called the trainee technicians scheme within the British Rail structure, as it was then, within the Signal and Telegraph department, as we were then known. And that involved attending college for 3 years on an electronics and electrical course, and then fundamentally spending quite a lot of time, anywhere between 3 months to 6 months, with the disciplines within signaling, so installation, design, testing, maintenance, mechanical signaling, a range of activities whilst studying, all with the aim of becoming what we called a technician at the time, which was effectively the third person in a team, a maintenance team. And that led me into a power signal box, which was the theme within the late 60s, early 70s in the UK. So we consolidated electromechanical signal boxes into one central power signal box and started to control larger areas with a relay-based interlocking that still to this day is working where I grew up in the northwest of England, a place called Warrington, which is on the West Coast main line, so the line that runs from Glasgow through to London Euston. That interlocking is still there. Even today, it's still working the job. I then left Warrington to take a job that was in charge of the maintenance and faulting team in Manchester. So I looked after Manchester Piccadilly station area, quite a busy terminal and through station in Manchester, so connecting to London and then off to Preston to connect with the West Coast Main, Liverpool and Manchester Main connection. And spent 2 or 3 years maintaining and faulting equipment out on the track. I then began to get a lot of training. We used to have a scheme where there was a student engineer who predominantly came from university background, and they came into the signalling department, and they used to come and spend time with me, so 6 weeks a month, and I took them through the basics effectively, which links later on to where I ultimately ended up. Because after being a supervisor for a little while looking after fault teams, I transitioned into training, into the then VR structure of the S&T training set up within British Rail. And that delivered the training right across the country. But I started my career out at a regional training centre in a place called Crewe, which is pretty relevant from railways because that's a key connector to the West Coast Main Line, off to Manchester, off to Wales, and the saying used to go, everybody changes trains at Crewe. So that was a busy station as well. That then brought us to privatisation. And as part of the privatisation process, I was part of the team that bought the business, because that's what quite a few business units in the privatisation process did. So we became the College of Railway Technology. Again, we were delivering training to contractors because in the UK we effectively gave maintenance, installation, testing over to the contracting companies in a bid to make the railways run better. But that's the jury's still out on that to a certain extent in the UK. And we're going through a transition even as we speak in the present time to change the way that the railways in the UK are run. That led me to work in that organisation for a few years, but then ultimately I left that organisation when we were sold for the third occasion. And I joined an old colleague who I'd worked with for many years, who'd formed Signet Solutions, who were beginning to deliver little bits of training. The founder, John Tilling, was predominantly working as a consultant with Network Rail on the West Coast mainline upgrades and the West Coast projects, as well as the Channel Tunnel scheme. I joined John because I'd been managing the training within the BR structure for signalling. And we began to develop Signet because we both had quite a key passion that people out on the track, people that were testing, designing and commissioning, should know what they're doing and be confident in what they're doing. So from that aspect, we had a very keen interest in developing that. And John needed help because he was getting requests for predominantly in the testing arena. But we then began to develop the portfolio, which is now Signet's portfolio, which is across installation design predominantly and testing with little bits of maintenance training. But in the UK, Network Rail effectively took the maintenance back into the organisation. So they do a lot of their volume training themselves. Signet as a company, we've worked in the UK predominantly, but we've also worked in Australia, India, Russia, Greece, a number of places where there's signal engineers and signal projects, because we tend to train at the principles level. So we train people in control tables, layouts, fundamental design principles testing, functional testing. And what brings me to Perth is that I'm working with Perth PTA to develop their testers, their functional testers. So I'm halfway through a functional testing course, and that's presently while I'm based in Perth for a couple of weeks.
Couple of things, thank you, Andy. A couple of things that strike me here. One is what I keep hearing time and again: this very excellent signaling education that people get in the UK, especially if they start very early as apprentices or in some kind of graduate programs with British Rail at the time. And that's something that I never had in Germany. This kind of education in Germany was rather unknown, or maybe I didn't find the way into it. And it's something that I'm still missing after all those years. And to some degree, I envy the people that really got this very fundamental signaling training from the ground up, because that basically sticks with you for the entire career. The other thing I noticed was that you were almost organically grew into this training business, that you did this officially as your main job inside British Rail for quite a while, and then the change was basically that you continued the same thing in your own company or together with your partner in Signet. If I compare this with my own venture into training, I did have some teaching roles at university and back at school, starting very early, was about 15 or so. But during my professional career, I was never an official trainer. What people did realize is that I was not afraid to speak up and explain things, and I was relatively good in explaining things. So more accidentally, I ended up, whenever there were visitors coming from other countries or some VIP visitors inside Germany, that I ended up doing product presentations and stuff like that. But I never had a formal training role where my main job was training in the way that you had it. And for me, it was basically just when I founded my own company, then I did consultancy as your partner in Signet. And then I also started training as a secondary arm of my business, basically following my passion of explaining things to others. So a slightly different path, but similar end result, only that I'm specializing on other things. Yeah. So while you are looking more at the hands-on stuff for design and testing and commissioning and things like that, for conventional signaling, I'm focusing very much on the newer technologies, ETCS, CBTC, and the like, and the application of that, and do's and don'ts, case studies, and so on. Yeah. Interesting. So now that you're doing training here in Perth, it's almost a bit like back to normal. And I think you did a LinkedIn post as well, where you basically said back to business or back to normal duties or something like that before you flew here.
Back to the day job.
Yes,
because I've been rather busy over the past year being IRSE president, so that takes a little bit of your time. So effectively for the last couple of years, really, I've been balancing running a company whilst also meeting the needs of being IRSE president, which takes quite a bit of planning and time. It ultimately takes quite a lot of your time. And I don't need to tell you as well as running a business. And if you were then asked to do another role as well, yes, it puts some demands on your time, which it was a great honour to become president. And one of the joys of running my own company, I've been able to support the IRSE and sponsor some events. As an example, we regularly on an annual basis, we have what we call minor railways. You might call them heritage railways here. But we've got people that work in those types of organisation who still have a fundamental responsibility for safety. So we provide a free, well, not free completely, but a very reasonable priced weekend training event for those people that carry out signalling work on minor railways. Mm-hmm. And there's another one coming up in September this year. So we effectively give our training centre over for the weekend, and we take them through. It tends to be targeted on this year. It's going to be targeted on repairs to cables and testing of cables. Sometimes we run a fundamental workshop to cover a little bit of the background, law, responsibilities, safety, and some fundamental maintenance techniques, because they still come under regulations and they need to know what they're doing. But obviously, a lot of these people are volunteers, so we wouldn't attempt to charge them commercial prices, and that's proved to be very popular. And it's one of my connections with the IRSE, because again, it's a little bit about this passion of, if we're asking people to do roles, they need to know what those roles involve, and they need to be confident in what they're doing and competent, because we're very keen for people to be competent. And the year, in fact, was spent a lot of the time and recent meetings, because of obvious reasons with the COVID and the epidemic. Our presidency goes from April to April. So I took over in April 2022. But I purposely planned to be travelling in the back end of my year, because I was more confident of travel restrictions, limitations, all those things at the time. When you're planning these things, you're still looking possibly sometimes 12 months, more than 12 months into the future. So it was it was a difficult time for everybody. But if you're planning an event or a visit, you need to secure dates, people to be in place, flights, logistics, all those things. And I was just more confident at the time. And it transpired that it worked out very well, because prior to being in Perth, I was in Melbourne, I was in Indonesia, I was in Malaysia. First off, I was in Australia, because I was in Adelaide to begin with. But all of those trips, if you like, and they were planned well over 12 months prior to that. And within the year, we also were able to, thankfully, organise our first face-to-face international convention. So for 2 years prior to September 2022, when we were in Glasgow, and we delivered the week-long traditional convention where we visited sites around Glasgow. We had technical papers. We had over 150 people, face-to-face meeting, young, old, in between, experienced, inexperienced. All of that knowledge was available over a coffee, over a dinner, and that's a fantastic event for us. And we're in Australia this year, because later in November this year we'll be in Melbourne for Steve Bosher, who's now the president. He's taken over from me for his Aspect 2023 in Melbourne. So a lot of work, and when you reflect on all the planning that you did and all the meetings, for for example, just on the Glasgow issue for probably 14 plus months, every Friday for about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, 4 core people of the planning committee would meet, keep things, push things where they needed to, check things. And with Glasgow, for example, at one point we were about 6 weeks out and we still weren't sure that people were going to release a room or allow us to visit, because Scotland, in the UK sense, was slightly slower coming out of COVID than the UK. But with very much cross fingers and hope, we got there, and everything did release off. And one really calming thing for me, we had great weather, which from a UK convention was really good. We were able to get to the Thursday and we'd had really nice weather all week. So that was fantastic. But lots of people did lots of work in the background, and every president will say this, but the background people that help you get to your year are pretty phenomenal. And it's a quality of the IRSE that continues to impress me, because it's a voluntary organisation as such. But the time and effort that people put into events, and my recent experience in Australia, the Adelaide, the AGM, the Australian section AGM in Adelaide was a fantastic event, and I was very, very happy to attend and speak at the conference.
So you said the presidency itself took 12 months from April 22 to April this year, but you said it all up, it was about 2 years of your time which was spent on that. So the previous 12 months before you actually became president, what was the big effort there? Was it the planning for your presidential year, or was it the time as is it vice president or so, what you are before you become president?
Yeah, I mean, to explain to people from the audience who may not know all the details, the IRSE has an organisational structure. We have an IRSE council, which is formed out of representatives from around the world, because we stretch from Australasia to India to Singapore to Holland to the UK to France, right across the globe. So we have representation on a council that sit and meet 10 times a year to formulate the strategy and push through the strategy of the IRSE. Within that, there is a management committee that looks much deeper in the strategy and reports to council as such. And part of the reason for being on the management committee is that you're selected to be part of a presidential path. So, for instance, right now we know who the next 3 presidents are going to be because they've joined a presidential path, so to speak. So effectively you become a junior vice president, a senior vice president, and then president. Due to some recent changes in our memorandums and articles, there's now 2 junior vice presidents, a senior vice president, and then a president. So we plan for this because, as you said, to become the president, you have to start to plan what your year will be, where you will visit, what your programme and what your theme will be. And that takes some time to put together. You arrange, typically within a presidential year, 7 technical presentations or presidential papers within the year. And again, that takes time to organise with the people. They start to draft their papers, checking of those papers, as well as the visits. And as part of being a junior vice president and senior vice president, you start to chair the management committee when you're a senior vice president. And then as the president, you chair the council meetings for the 12 months. So there's quite a lot of meetings involved. And we, as part of my beginning the presidential path, we started to look at the meeting times, because very traditionally, and because of historical reasons, we're based in the UK from a HQ point of view. It could be anywhere in the world, literally, but history formed us in 1912 in the UK. But we'd met for quite a while at a traditional UK time, and then expected people like yourselves to be awake and sentient at 1 o'clock in the morning, which began to be a little bit of a stretch. And we're very committed, and certainly within my presidential year, we've got to be sure that we understand that it's a global organisation. People sometimes think, oh, IRSE UK. Well, there's a UK section, and the HQ happens to be in the UK, but we're a global organisation, which I pushed very much within my year. And even Steve Bosher is carrying this on because he's talking about globalisation in a signalling sense. So we looked at our meeting times and we started to rotate the meeting times. So next week, for example, to a certain extent, it works out quite well for me whilst I'm based here and working. I've got meetings, they range from 5 p.m. that is, to 8 o'clock. And the last meeting next week is 0600 for me here. And then it rotates around the country. So sometimes my first council meeting, for example, started at 10 p.m. UK time. So we've rotated those meetings around, and also quite sensibly, I think, when we faced COVID, as you were saying, you meet with people from around the world, and we diverted to a Teams meeting approach. We only actually meet face-to-face once a year. When we've got a convention or an aspect, we meet for a whole day before those events start to look at the strategy and talk about plans. All of the other meetings are held via Teams, and one advantage we saw for that is that everybody can get a say within the meetings, because what we were experiencing, there could be 12 people in the London office and then people around the world, and despite people trying, the habit is that the people in the room, the 12 people, will speak to each other and begin to forget that there's another 15 plus people in different countries also in the meeting. So we've improved the meeting schedules, and in fact the sections around the world do face-to-face meetings, but they found great success in people being able to access the meeting and not have to travel for an hour, 2 hours to a place to attend a technical paper. So people attend online now as well as face-to-face. And we've within my year, I was very keen to increase the video content on from an IRSE point of view, which we achieved.
Yes. Yeah, the opportunity for virtual meetings and webinars was really quite distinct during COVID, because everybody did it and everybody became much more used to things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or tools like that. And this certainly opened up much more opportunity for people to listen into. So I think the numbers of participants probably went very much up, because for instance, it enabled me to attend a local IRSE meeting in Sydney without having to fly 4,000 kilometers across the country. Because Australia is quite a big place, and as you know, you can't really just go over there for, 1 hour meeting and a glass of beer afterwards, and then you go back home. That normally doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you can basically just jump on a Zoom call or Teams call at the end of the day, it's much easier to do. And the same applies also to training courses and conferences and stuff. So one thing I'm planning for September is a virtual global CBTC conference, where I'm trying to bring together all the time zones from all the different parts of the world. Yeah, so I'm having one session for Asia Pacific, which is basically all the time zones, say from India to New Zealand. A second session is from the Americas, which covers North and South America, which is so far away time zone wise that it's basically impossible to bring them into the same bracket. And then there's a third session sitting somewhere in the middle for Europe and the Middle East, which is relatively close together, only a couple of hours or so of time zone difference. And then when you record the sessions and offer them as replay, it basically gives opportunity for every participant to listen to everything. So people can say, okay, well, the session in my time zone, that's during my daytime. So I'm spending 6 hours to attend that session, but I don't need to spend the entire night watching the session from the Americas. I just watch the replays the next day or next weekend or whenever it's comfortable for me. And by doing that, you have access to all the presentations. And I think as much as live person-to-person conferences still have their place, they still make sense for networking and everything, I think that those virtual events come more and more into the mix and also have to come more and more into the mix. So I was recently a little bit disappointed with our section here in Australasia because they had big plans in establishing an ongoing series of webinars, and somehow this has fallen into a heap. So it didn't really go forward. I don't know whether that was an organizational issue, that they didn't find the people pushing it and driving it, or what else the reason was, but that was definitely like a disappointment, because it seemed that we were going straight back into the pre-COVID times where you basically had to be at an event in person in order to attend it. So, and personally, I mean, I put a number of topics forward for these webinar series, basically saying, well, here you've got 3 topics, just pick one or pick all of them if they are all of interest. And I haven't even heard back, even though I tried asking, well, what's the status with these webinars? Oh, yeah, we were still thinking about it and planning about it, but still hasn't happened a year later, which is... Yeah. But on the global scale, I think things like the IRSE 10 that you started is really, really a very good thing, especially if there is some kind of continuity. So if this is not just a thing that, okay, well, we did 5 episodes and then Andy's presidential year was over and then the whole thing basically just watered down and disappeared. But it seems that this is going to be an ongoing thing, which is really, really good, because it helps people getting in touch with our industry from anywhere in the world, regardless whether they are signaling people or railway people with some interest in signaling, or people from outside the railway industry that say, well, this railway industry, what is this? And then they get in touch with signaling and not just with, I don't know, locomotives or trains or what the normal first points of contacts are. So.
And that was the driving force between IRSE 10 was exactly that, because we needed to give a vehicle for somebody who's not an expert, not even started their career, just started their career, even somebody who's in a career and just wants a small amount of content or a little bit of information on the subject. And the really good thing about the video content is that we've seen from the presidential papers, IRSE 10 as well, and you've got to try and get the subjects right, because there's got to be a little bit of interest and passion from people. But I'm very pleased that within my year I was already trying to get some help and funding for the IRSE to continue, and a good development from a UK perspective. We found that we've got reasonable facilities in the HQ to do videos with reasonable effort, but not excessive effort, and at a reasonable cost. So I see that continuing. I think one of our challenges is to perhaps get a little better at doing that in the different places around the world. To get that it's a little bit of training, to be blunt about it, to get good at doing that.
Yes.
But I think the direction we've said is that face-to-face is important, but also what we've learned is, and I've had this conversation with I remember I attended a dinner as well as senior vice president then, up in Crewe, where I used to work for a little while. And they said, when are we going back to face-to-face meetings? I said, well, we can look at face-to-face meetings. I said, but if I look at my position and looking to become president, we've got 5,000 members to provide content and advice and support and information to. I said, I've been on many local meetings when, for a number of reasons, travel, as you pointed out, and having to spend money to get to somewhere, and also the work balance as well. I said, I've been to meetings when there's been 30 people in a room, and yet the section has got, in excess of 600 plus members, even more than that in some cases. So I said, we've really got to balance between those two things. So I said, what I'm looking at is I want to provide information content support for the 5,000 members. The online version of seminars, conferences, discussions, all of those things that happen, and to then let people sample them when it suits them. So they've got a working day which doesn't suit the meeting time. Well, that's okay, because they can watch it during the evening, or they can watch it. And with IRSE 10, it was very much, well, this is the 10-minute session that most people could actually timetable and give up within a lunch maybe, or a short break, or an evening time. It would suit for people to get that. And it in effect, what we've got to do from the institution, and even in general from the whole railway perspective, we've got to give people an insight into the interest and the challenge. And one key achievement for me, again, from within my year, was to speak to 2 female engineers, because we've got to right that balance in the industry. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I was very lucky to call back one of my student engineers, who spent, and I always fondly remember the time we were together for 6 weeks in Manchester, and we've kept touch over 25 plus years, as she quite rightly rose through the ranks and became the head signal engineer within a region within the UK. And she was my first speaker, my first technical, to see her perspective of being a female engineer. Excuse me. To then finish off in Adelaide with Jane Copperthwaite, who related Claire's talk, but then looked at how we actually get people into engineering, not just females, but people into engineering, but with a slight tilt towards the female engineer. And she made a good point. She said, we don't actually advertise the fact that signal engineers solve puzzles, and they've got a great challenge, which a lot of our projects, our technologies, our interfaces, whether we choose the right ETCS package or the right CBT system, or we look at the interoperability issues that become a discussion point. And she was really quite right, because she said we don't really sell that well. And that's something that I'm very keen to support. And really, I saw a really good initiative in the south of Ireland yesterday. I think that came up on LinkedIn, where they've got a whole site dedicated to let school children in, to let them be a train driver with a simulator and look at the situation that they could be in and what actually happens. But it's really this puzzle solving, because there's lots of talented young people, and quite a lot of people like solving puzzles. And the average designer, installer, tester, maintainer, project engineer has those challenges, possibly on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So it's something we really need to let people know about, and the insights to let people get a little picture of that, and a taster to come into the industry, and then hopefully consider joining the IRSE to get that support on a global basis, and begin to tap into that knowledge is a really positive thing.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to pick up on was your remark regarding the efforts to get to live events. I had this firsthand, and to some degree you were involved as well, because we were in contact last year in November at the forefront of the CBTC conference in Toronto, and you ended up going there and being there as part of your presidency, I presume, and one of the presidential paper was delivered at that conference as well. I was thinking to go there. I put an abstract in, which was accepted for presentation. And then I looked into the logistics of getting there. And I found out that if you try to draw a line from where I live in Western Australia to Toronto, it's almost exactly opposite side of the world. And when I started looking for flights, I ended up with flight times that were somewhere between 30 and 50 hours per direction. I'm not joking that some of the connections were 50 hours to get from start to finish. and the cost for flights have exploded during COVID. So they were nowhere near from what I had in mind from my last overseas trips, which was back in, I don't know, 2017 or something like that. And so I looked at the entire effort and costs to get there, and the time requirement, and of course also the risk. I mean, if you have a travel itinerary just to get to Toronto, which has you flying through 3 or 4 different countries, I'm basically a biohazard by the time I arrive in Toronto. And then anybody gets COVID at the conference, and that was because of that guy from Australia who came all the way over here. And I just didn't want that. So I ended up getting to the organizer saying, well, look, I can't really come in person. I'm very happy to do it virtually, to present virtually, which wasn't possible because now it's in a hotel and we don't have the equipment and all this kind of stuff. So if it can be maybe some kind of a hybrid that you see often enough, where people can come live in person if they want to, but there's also some space for people that can't come, be it recordings for replay, be it making at least the papers available on the IRSE website. That used to be done for previous CBTC conferences, but I don't think it was done for the last one. So creating a bit of a balance, where people do have live events, and if they live close enough or they don't shy the travel costs, they can get there. But also having virtual events, which basically allows everybody to participate and increases the reach of those events. Otherwise, taking the segue of the last thing you said, like attracting people to the industry. I mean, one thing that I see as helpful in doing that is providing information. And information can come in different types. It can be as educational videos such as IRSE 10. It can also be via training courses, as long as the training courses are aimed not just at signaling specialists that are already existing signaling specialists, but also people who are relatively new in the industry or know less about signaling. So what's your view? What can be done, or where can we improve as an industry to attract more people into it?
Well, I think that some of the initiatives, and I think, I'd be seen as being biased, obviously, but IRSE 10 is a thread of an idea. I think the more we show that puzzle solving and the attractiveness of that, as I say, I only saw it briefly yesterday, but I think if companies, for example, invest in the right sort of things where people can experience what could be the possibilities within a career, and I think they've got to be quite informative about that to people. And I know there's graduate fairs, there's apprenticeship events. I think there just needs to be some thought as to what the content of those are and what information we give to people. And I think a really good initiative that we've begun, I was very happy to be over in Malaysia, where we've looked at signing an MOU with a university so that they've actually begun to build content from the IRSE modules, for example, into their university course. Because I think classically what we find to a certain extent is we have very well educated people in maybe electrical and electronic engineering, very well taught at university to a very good level, but then they actually find themselves into the railway industry with, again, going back to my background, where did it start? Well, I started on the ground level, if you will, to get that understanding of the equipment, how it interfaces, how it connects to the interlocking, how that whole thing ties together. But the people that have been very well educated then have to learn that to a certain extent. So the very good reasoning behind the partnership, if you will, between the university and the IRSE, and this is the same way with, I think, potential employers. So big employers could probably put some effort into that as well, and I'm sure some do. But I think how you link what they're doing at the university, and if it's inbuilt that they're learning learning about the interlockings, the point machines, the interfaces, the systems, generic systems, what's CBTC, what's ETCS, what are the challenges that are going to come along. If they're learning that in the university, the key thing is, because one of the comments you'll very often hear is that if you're in a business, they're probably going to say, well, when is that student engineer, apprentice, whatever you want to call it for a moment, when are they going to be productive? Now, if you've already built some of that learning in at the front end so that you don't then have to make that link afterwards, I think you've done a really good thing in that sense. So I think how we bring people in, and you've got to attract people at the end with some effort and proper facilities, proper workshops, proper information. I think then how you link that education path is going to be an important way that you make sure people are actually up to speed to a certain extent as they get into the organisation, as against the typical graduate scheme, for example. And we do courses for back in the UK for Network Rail, and they have a graduate scheme. It's about 2 years, and then the people that are on that scheme then decide whether they're going to be a civil engineer, they're going to go into traction, they're going to go into various disciplines, but they take 2 years before they even decide what they're going to do and specialise in. So how much longer do they then take once they've decided how to specialise? You're probably talking another couple of years or so. So it's taken them 4 years to get to a point when they're going to think about what they're actually going to be involved in. So I think we have to support that better and effectively design it into those courses so that from an educational point of view, coming from school, coming to college, coming to university, and the same with colleges, not everybody may go to university. It's that path that can link them so that when they come into the industry, they're certainly up to a certain level of understanding and knowledge that can make them effective quicker, which from an employer point of view will be popular as well. And we have to get to the nuts and bolts of commercialism, and if we can make that better, it would be better for the whole industry. And I was very clear, excuse me, to say in my presidential year, I'm nothing but amazed with the technology, the systems, the monitoring, the information that we can gather now with various systems. But that's relatively not useless as such, but we're not going to get the best out of that if we don't have engineers who understand the full picture. As I've stated many times, that the global industry will be a better, safer, better performing industry with professional engineers. But you've actually got to give the people that ability and knowledge and understanding to become that engineer. We've just got to fill those gaps earlier and consistently. The other thing I'd say is that we've got to do it consistently. So if we find a model that works, I think that should become the model. And we feel that the understanding and ultimately the competence of those people, supported by a licensing scheme, which could transfer to the global picture, because many times, excuse me, when we went around the world, so to speak, so in Canada, for example, when you mentioned the CBTC conference, Blaine, who's the chief executive of the IRSE, and myself met quite a few local companies. And one of their points was that they really struggle when they're trying to manpower resources for a project. Selecting and getting the right information about the people is quite difficult. And then linking the engineering bodies within the different countries. I think there just needs to be a key, something that causes us problems in signalling all the time. There needs to be a key interface between those bodies, between the universities, between people that are coming into signal communications, the discipline, what that discipline becomes, of course, because in your specialist area, comms is a key aspect of that. So we've got to give that learning to people better than I think we deliver it at the moment, in a complete sense, in a global sense. And I think that would be a way to make sure we get better engineers in the longer term.
It seems to me that it needs a strategy. Whatever you do needs some kind of forward planning, and then it also needs some kind of consequence to implement that planning. And you can see this in some fields. So, for example, one industry partner doing something for children and attracting them to railways and specifically to signaling, which I've seen recently, is Siemens in Germany. They are doing quite a bit to go to schools and attract children at a relatively young age. Young means way before university, to attract them to railway as a profession. And very often it's basically just the awareness that that people with an engineering degree can actually work in railways, and for people to get interesting and then steer their university studies accordingly. Your apprenticeship at BR was certainly one of those strategic things where people are taken deliberately through various positions in order to create a certain roundedness in their education. But these things are just temporary. So it seems like after the apprentice program, you basically pick a job where you want to go. And very often that's the end of the career planning, and everything else is more or less left to accident. So unless you get into another strategic program where, for example, your employer may have a certain scheme to develop people into, I don't know, system specialists or something like that. So there's another supplier out there, Alstom, where I've seen recently where somebody said, "Hey, I've just been promoted, or I became accredited as a system specialist," and he basically went through a series of steps where you develop from a junior specialist to a intermediate specialist to a senior specialist, which to me seems again like some strategic thing where people need to go through a certain development to reach a certain endpoint and a certain competency, a certain qualification. Training courses is another approach where ideally you have a strategy to get people from a point A to a point B and think about a way how to get them there. But what's probably missing is somehow an overarching thing between all those different punctual activities. Maybe it's pretty hard to achieve, but I think, yeah, it really depends on how far you look into the future. So where you start, say if you started in childhood and you end up with a super signaling specialist, there's a lot of in between where you need to think, okay, well, what do they need to learn in school? What do they need to study at university? What kind of trainings do they need? What kind of job rotation they require to get all the necessary skills? It's a nice vision. Whether we get there or whether we stick with punctual initiatives, I don't know, remains to be seen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, commercialism gets involved, and you know, the beauty of when I was at that learning stage, it was very normal to go with set different disciplines for a number of months. As I said, you know, anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. That's quite a battle in the real world, because if you then said to a potential employer, oh, they've got to go to the design office for 6 months, they've got to go to various places. And we've experienced it in the past. We've said to people, you know, they're really short on designer resources, they're really short on a particular thing, and they've asked us to put together a picture of how can we get these people to designer level within 2 years or within a time scale. And we've laid out what underpinning information they might need to do, so maybe a training course or courses, and then built in what they need to then do when they go back out to the workplace, and what experience they should be given or what support they should be given. And I have to say from experience, the bit that falls down on some of those is that they really struggle to get the people out in the field with the right people and with the support, because obviously they've got people that are trying to deliver projects. And of course, when you're in the storm of delivering a project, it's very difficult to then step to one side and say, well, this is what we do. This is the important thing to remember. This is what we should think about when we're doing this. But it ultimately ends up being false economy, because if they don't do that or plan that in, when the said project manager that could be helping them and lead them gets to leave for another company or gets to retirement age, if the skill and the understanding and the knowledge hasn't been passed on, you're asking a person to start from a lower position to become that project manager, designer, principals designer, whatever it is. You're asking them to effectively learn it themselves, which is always a challenge. But it's a hard commercial sell sometimes, because they will want to know when those people are going to be delivering value. But it's a long-term strategy issue. I think some people are beginning to get it, because you mentioned some people, but I know people within Siemens and within other organisations, they are doing the apprenticeship schemes. They are doing some graduate training, but I think that to link those all together is the key. That perhaps is still a little bit weaker than it should be. It could be a bit stronger. And it's the key word, I think, is consistency. It's no use having a scheme for maybe 3 or 4 years and thinking, oh, haven't we done a good job? And we've got X number of graduates. Because in reality, and this is, I think this would be quite a thing across the world effectively, but we certainly find in the UK we can't develop enough engineers to replace the people that are disappearing. That the skill level that's disappearing it is nowhere by the number of people that are coming in and getting to a relevant level of knowledge to be able to ultimately replace those people.
And it needs to be widespread. It needs to be widespread. It needs to be appreciated. So, say for example, if a company thinks that mentorship is of importance to basically build up the next generation of engineers, then the senior people that could provide this mentoring and that are interested in providing this mentoring, they should get some time allocation to actually do it, which means you cannot accept those people at the same time to be 100% productive working on projects. It doesn't work. There is some time allocation that is required where performance will come down compared to working fully focused 100% at the top of this ability, where you need to slow down to explain something to more junior people, to spend time talking to you, spend time guiding them, spending time to rethinking certain tasks. Like if I have a design engineer that comes into my department for only 3 months, I could say they can't do anything of sense within those 3 months, and then I'll put them somewhere between the coffee machine and the photocopier, and that will be terrible for both the designer coming in, the junior designer, and for us, because as an employer we have a very poor image. Or I can rethink the task and say, okay, well, how can I create a period of 3 months where this person coming in can actually do some meaningful work? And in doing this, in rethinking these tasks, I may make my entire department more suitable for new people coming in, because the same challenge I don't just have with the graduate designer popping in for 3 months. I have the same problem with any new employee in my department, and they need to be getting up to speed. And so if I need to make it a priority, I need to allocate time for that, which means I need to allocate money for that, because time is money to some extent. And then, as you said, it needs to be done consequently. And the more consequent and the more widespread this is done, the more successful it will be at the end of the day. So I think that's a nice summary for our talk. We nearly reached an hour, which is my upper limit for these kind of podcast conversations. Thank you very much for your time, Andy. I thought that was quite interesting, both with regards to the IRSE and also how to possibly attract more people to the industry. with regards to IRSE 10, we are about to do a little experiment, I believe, because I don't think you've done an IRSE in 10 before, which was done virtually and recorded. I think everything so far has been done live in the studio, so we will see how that works when we take this to the virtual space. But for this conversation here, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you being here and taking time on the weekend after your training and before your second week of training. And and all the best for your future endeavors. And I hope that 1 year of IRSE presidency has some positive impact on your further life, and you don't think back of it and say, oh my God, that was so much effort.
No, it was thankfully very enjoyable, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. It was a great pleasure, and I look forward to our conversation around IRSE 10 as well.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.
So for everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you do, like and subscribe, tell your colleagues about it, and also check out the other episodes. And as usual, keep it simple and bye for now.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again, real quick before you head off. If you are a fan of communications-based train control, or short CBTC, there's an event coming up in September that you absolutely don't want to miss. It's the first virtual global CBTC conference. It's called CBTC World Summit 2023, and it's happening on the 20th and the 21st of September. There will be 3 sessions of about 6 hours duration each for 3 different global regions, one for Asia Pacific, one's for North and South America, and one's for Europe and the Middle East. So wherever you are in the world, one of those sessions will be during the daytime in your time zone, and you can watch it live for the full 6 hours with 6 presentations. The kicker about this is that all other presentations, including the ones from your own session, will be available for replay via recordings. So that means that if the other session should be in the middle of your night, you can still watch it on demand at a time that's more convenient for you and doesn't interfere with your good night's sleep. The conference is available for registration right now at my training portal under docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I'm putting a lot of effort into this conference. It will be an absolute blockbuster event, and I very much hope to see you there. Until then, keep it simple and bye for now. Hey, Doc Frank here, host of the Rebel Conversations podcast. Thank you for listening.